So, today we're going to dive into a pretty strange discovery from way back in 1843. But this story isn't just about what happened. It's really about how a single event can become a kind of mirror, one that reveals a whole lot more about us and what we believe than it does about the event itself.
Let me just start by asking you a question. Can a piece of history, something that happened long ago, actually act like a mirror? Can looking at it tell you more about your own biases, your own starting point, than it does about the cold, hard facts? Just hang on to that thought, okay? Because it's the key to this whole thing.
You've probably heard of the Rorschach Test, right? Those famous, kind of weird-looking ink blots. Well, the whole idea is that what you see in those ambiguous shapes says something about you. And that term has kind of jumped out of the psychology office and into everyday language. It's become a perfect metaphor for any situation that's just so unclear that how we interpret it says more about us than about the thing we're looking at. And that is the exact lens we're using today. So, what is our historical ink blot? Well, it's the very strange case of the Kinderhook Plates. This is a story that's got everything: a mysterious discovery, a pretty clever deception, and a debate that is, believe it or not, still going on. Okay, so try to picture this. The year is 1843. You're in a small town called Kinderhook, Illinois. A bunch of guys are digging in an old Native American mound, and suddenly they unearth something totally wild. 6 small, bell-shaped brass plates, and they're covered in these bizarre symbols nobody's ever seen before. As you can imagine, this discovery caused an absolute sensation.
Now, this timeline, this is where it gets really interesting. The plates get dug up in April 1843 and are almost immediately brought to Joseph Smith, the founder of the Latter-day Saint movement. But get this, a confession from one of the guys who made them, saying it was all a hoax, doesn't come out for another 36 years. And the final scientific proof that they were fakes, that doesn't happen until 1980. That huge gap is so important because it created nearly a century of ambiguity where the truth was completely up for grabs.
And right there, that ambiguity, that's what leads us to the absolute heart of this thing. When Joseph Smith, a man who claimed he could translate ancient records, gets his hands on these bizarre plates, what did he see? This is the exact moment where the story just splits right down the middle into 2 totally different paths.
This one journal entry, this is it. This is the smoking gun for the entire debate. It's from Joseph Smith's personal secretary, a guy named William Clayton, and he writes that Joseph translated a portion and even gave specific details, saying they were about a descendant of an Egyptian pharaoh. This one second-hand account is the piece of evidence that everyone on both sides is staring at.
So, how do you read that journal entry? This is the fork in the road. For critics, the case is closed. Clayton's journal is proof positive that Joseph Smith fell for a pretty crude hoax, which they say calls all of his other claims into question. But for his supporters, the story is way more nuanced. They argue his comment was just academic curiosity, not some divine revelation. And they point to the fact that he never published an official translation and seemed to just lose interest, which to them suggests he wasn't fooled at all.
Now this number, 14 months, this is a huge piece of the puzzle for the apologetic view. That's how long Joseph Smith lived after he saw the plates, and in over a year of sermons, writings, you name it, he never mentioned them again. To believers, that silence is deafening. It proves he knew they weren't important. But to critics, it proves nothing. He just died before the hoax could be fully exposed.
The thing is, the Kinderhook Plates don't exist in a vacuum, not even close. They're actually part of a much, much bigger pattern of these kinds of historical challenges that really define the early history of the Latter-day Saint movement, a pattern that believers sometimes describe with a phrase from the scriptures, opposition in all things.
And, just look at this list. It is extensive. You've got controversies about where his books came from, like the Book of Abraham papyri. You've got challenges to historical claims, like horses in ancient America. You even have modern scientific debates over DNA evidence. And here's the kicker. Every single one of these is its own little Rorschach test, where the exact same evidence is seen by critics as absolute proof of fraud, and by believers as just another test of faith that can be resolved.
So all of this, it brings us right back to where we started. We've got the facts, the timelines, the totally conflicting interpretations all laid out. And now the spotlight swings away from the history and right back onto the observer. Right back onto you and onto me. Look, here's the bottom line. The Kinderhook Plates incident is the perfect historical ink blot.
The evidence is just murky enough that a skeptic sees a con man getting caught red-handed, while a believer sees a prophet wisely brushing off a distraction. What you ultimately conclude about what happened probably has everything to do with what you already believe about the man at the center of it all.
And so that leaves us with one final, and I think pretty powerful question. As you look at this historical inkblot, the strange story of some little brass plates dug up in an Illinois field, what do you see?